were looking for a lead singer and spotted an ad from Ozzy Osbourne in a music store?
It is, yes.
Is that the way, is that true?
Yes, it is true. Ozzy was at school in a younger year than me.
Yeah.
With me. But I didn't really associate with him at school. And we were looking for a singer, Bill and myself, the drummer. And we went around the music shop and we saw this ad, Ozzy Zig requires gig.
Oh.
I said to Bill, I know an Ozzy. I said, but he can't be.
Can't be the same guy.
And sure enough, we went round to the address of the house and knocked the door, and his mother came. John, it's for you. Yeah. And I saw him walking up the hall, and I said to Bill, forget it. Anyway, he came to the door and we talked to him for a bit, and then we left. And I said to Bill, oh, forget that. You know, I said, we don't want to go there. I said, as far as I know, he can't sing. I never knew he could sing.
Yep.
And then sort of a few days later, Ozzy came round to my house. I didn't live that far away from him. He came round with the keys of the bass player and looking for a drummer.
Tony Iommi was the last to hear this from Ozzy Osbourne. On the morning of July 22, 2025, just hours before Ozzy Osbourne would die from acute myocardial infarction, Tony Iommi received a phone call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The legendary Black Sabbath guitarist, who had shared stages and studios with the Prince of Darkness for over 5 decades, was about to become the last person outside of Ozzy's immediate family to hear words that would reveal the depth of their friendship and the weight of secrets that had been carried for decades. What Ozzy told Tony during that final 23-minute conversation was so profound, so unexpected, and so emotionally devastating that the normally stoic guitarist broke down completely, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what his old friend was confessing in what they both somehow knew would be their last exchange. The revelation would forever change how Tony understood their relationship, their music, and Theeman, who had been both his greatest collaborator and his most complicated friend. I almost didn't answer the phone, Tony revealed in an exclusive interview 3 weeks after Ozzy's death. It was early morning, and I thought it might be another journalist wanting a comment about his condition. But something made me pick up, and I'm grateful I did, because what Ozzy told me that morning was the most important conversation we ever had in 57 years of knowing each other. The call began with Ozzy's voice sounding clearer and stronger than Tony had heard it in months. Despite his advancing Parkinson's disease, there was something different in his tone, urgent, purposeful, as if he was racing against time to share something crucial before it was too late. If this final revelation between two metal legends is moving you as much as it's moving us, please show your support with a like. Some truths between friends deserve to be preserved forever. Tony, Ozzy began, his voice carrying an intensity that immediately commanded attention. I need to tell you something I should have said 46 years ago. Something that's been eating at me my entire career. I'm running out of time and I can't die with this secret still buried inside me. What followed was a confession that stunned Tony Iommi and would later shock the entire metal community when he decided to share it publicly. Ozzy revealed that the song Children of the Grave, one of Black Sabbath's most powerful and enduring tracks from their 1971 album, Master of Reality, had been directly inspired by a conversation the two had shared about Tony's childhood experiences during World War II. He told me that he had written Children of the Grave after I shared stories about hiding in bomb shelters during the Birmingham Blitz, Tony revealed, his voice still heavy with emotion weeks later. I had told him about the fear about watching the city burn, about wondering if we would survive the night. I never knew those stories had affected him so deeply or that they had inspired one of our most important songs. The memory of those conversations came flooding back to Tony as Ozzy spoke. He remembered being young men, barely out of their teens, sharing stories about their childhoods in working-class Birmingham. The war had ended when they were small children, but its effects had shaped their entire generation. The rationing, the bomb damage still visible throughout the city, the stories passed down from older siblings and parents who had lived through the terror. I told him about sleeping in the underground stations, about my mother holding me while the sirens wailed, Tony recalled, about coming up from the shelters and seeing buildings destroyed, wondering if our house would still be there. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just history to us, just stories about what our families had endured. But Ozzy was absorbing every detail, but the revelation about Children of the Grave was just the beginning. Ozzy continued his confession by revealing that many of Black Sabbath's most significant songs had been born from private conversations between the two friends. conversations that Tony had never realized were being transformed into the dark, powerful lyrics that would define heavy metal. He told me that War Pigs came from stories I shared about my father's experiences in the war. Tony explained that Iron Man was inspired by something I said about feeling like machinery, like I wasn't human anymore after losing my fingertips in that factory accident. Song after song, he was taking my pain, my experiences, my struggles, and turning them into art that would touch millions of people. The factory accident Tony referenced occurred when he was 17 years old, just before Black Sabbath formed. He had lost the tips of 2 fingers on his right hand in a sheet metal press on his last day of work at a factory in Birmingham. It was an injury that should have ended his guitar career before it began. Instead, he adapted by creating artificial fingertips from melted plastic bottles and developing a unique playing style that would become central to Black Sabbath's sound. I never connected my accident to Iron Man, Tony admitted, but Ozzy told me that when I described feeling like part of me had been replaced by metal, like I was part machine, it sparked something in his imagination. He said he could see this character, this Iron Man who was trapped between human and machine, and that's where the song came from. The emotional weight of these revelations was overwhelming for Tony, who had spent decades believing that Ozzy's lyrics came purely from his own imagination and experiences. Learning that so many of Black Sabbath's most powerful songs had been rooted in their personal friendship and shared history fundamentally changed how he understood their creative partnership. For 50 years, I thought I was just the guitar player and he was the lyricist. Tony said, I never realized that our friendship, our conversations, our shared experiences were the foundation of our music. He was taking pieces of my soul and turning them into songs that would outlive both of us. Ozzy's confession during that final phone call revealed the depth of his process for transforming personal stories into universal art. He described how he would lie awake at night after their conversations, replaying Tony's words, feeling the emotions behind them and searching for ways to translate specific experiences into lyrics that could speak to anyone who had ever felt fear, pain, or alienation. He told me he would write pages and pages of lyrics after we talked, Tony revealed. Not just copying what I had said, but trying to capture the feeling of it, the essence of what it meant to be afraid or hurt or angry. He said he was trying to honor my experiences while making them accessible to people who had never lived through what I had. But Ozzy's confession went even deeper. He revealed that he had been struggling with guilt for decades about using Tony's personal experiences without permission, about transforming private pain into public art without ever acknowledging the source of his inspiration. He was crying on the phone. Tony recalled this man who had never apologized for anything in his life was breaking down, asking for my forgiveness for using my stories without telling me. He said he had been carrying this guilt for 46 years. That every time we performed those songs, he felt like he was stealing something that belonged to me. The revelation explained something that had puzzled Tony for years. Why Ozzy sometimes seemed emotional or distant when performing certain Black Sabbath songs, particularly Children of the Grave and Iron Man. What Tony had interpreted as artistic temperament had actually been guilt over the hidden origins of the music. There were times during concerts when I'd look over and see tears in his eyes while he was singing, Tony remembered. I thought it was just the power of the music affecting him. But no, I understand he was thinking about where those songs really came from, about the friendship and trust he felt he had betrayed by not telling me the truth. The guilt had been particularly intense during their most successful periods when Paranoid and Iron Man were dominating radio and MTV. When Black Sabbath was being hailed as pioneers of heavy metal, the greater their success became, the more Ozzy felt like he was achieving fame based on someone else's experiences. He told me that during our biggest tours, when thousands of people were singing along to those lyrics, he would think about me and feel like a fraud, Tony said. He said the applause felt hollow because he knew the real stories behind the songs, and he felt like I deserved credit that I wasn't getting. Ozzy's confession continued with even more surprising revelations about other Black Sabbath classics. He told Tony that Paranoid, their biggest hit, had been inspired by stories Tony shared about his struggles with anxiety after his accident. The song's frantic energy and lyrics about losing one's mind had been Ozzy's interpretation of the psychological trauma Tony had experienced after his injury. Sweet Leaf was based on conversations about escapism and coping mechanisms born from discussions about how people deal with pain and disappointment. Even Nib, one of their earliest songs, had roots in private discussions between the two friends about good and evil, discussions that had grown out of their shared working-class Catholic upbringing in Birmingham. Song after song, he was revealing these connections I had never seen. Tony said, "Our entire catalog, all the music that made us legends, was built on our friendship in ways I never understood. He wasn't just writing lyrics. He was documenting our lives, our struggles, our shared experiences as working-class kids from Birmingham, trying to make sense of the world." The conversation took an even more emotional turn when Ozzy revealed why he had never told Tony the truth about the song's origins. He explained that he had been afraid Tony would be angry about having his personal experiences used without permission, or that he would demand co-writing credits that could have complicated their business relationships and potentially destroyed the band. He said he had been protecting our friendship by keeping the secret, Tony explained. He thought that if I knew how much of myself was in those songs, it might change our dynamic, might make things awkward between us. He chose to carry the guilt rather than risk losing our friendship over creative credit. But there was another reason for Ozzy's secrecy that cut even deeper. He revealed that he had been insecure about his own creative abilities throughout his career, feeling that his contributions to Black Sabbath were less valuable than Tony's musical compositions, Gizza Butler's bass playing, and Bill Ward's drumming. Using Tony's experiences as inspiration had made him feel like a fraud, like he was taking credit for creativity that wasn't entirely his own. He told me he had always felt like the least talented member of the band, Tony revealed, clearly moved by this admission. He said that while I could create amazing riffs and the others were skilled musicians, he felt like he was just the guy who screamed into the microphone. He thought that if people knew his lyrics came from my experiences, they would realize he wasn't really a creative force in the band. This insecurity had tormented Ozzy throughout his career, both with Black Sabbath and as a solo artist. A Venus, he became one of the most recognizable figures in rock music. He continued to doubt his own creative worth, feeling that his success was built on borrowed experiences and emotions rather than genuine artistic talent. It broke my heart to hear him say that, Tony admitted. Here was this man who had created some of the most powerful and influential music in history, and he thought he was a fraud. He could never see that taking my experiences and turning them into universal art, that was his genius, his unique gift. That was what made him irreplaceable. As their conversation continued, Ozzy revealed specific details about how he had transformed Tony's stories into lyrics. He described the painstaking process of taking personal private pain and finding ways to make it universal to create songs that could speak to anyone who had ever felt afraid, damaged, or lost. He told me about staying up all night after our conversations, writing and rewriting lyrics, trying to capture not just the facts of what I had told him, but the emotions behind them. Tony said he was trying to honor my experiences while making them accessible to people who had never lived through war or industrial accidents or any of the specific things that had shaped my life. The conversation revealed the depth of Ozzy's empathy and his remarkable ability to connect with other people's pain. Rather than simply appropriating Tony's experiences, he had been serving as a translator, taking one person's specific struggles and transforming them into art that could provide comfort and understanding to millions of people facing their own challenges. He said that every time someone told us that Iron Man or Children of the Grave had helped them through a difficult time, he thought about me, Tony revealed. He said he felt like he was passing on my strength and resilience to people who needed it, like our friendship was helping strangers all over the world deal with their own pain and fear. This revelation reframed the entire Black Sabbath catalog for Tony, helping him understand that their music had been more collaborative than anyone realized. While he had provided the musical foundation and Ozzy had written the lyrics, the emotional content had come from their shared experiences and the deep mutual trust that had developed between them over decades of friendship. I realized that those songs weren't just mine or just his. They were ours in a way that went beyond normal songwriting collaboration. Tony explained he had taken the most important moments of our friendship and turned them into something eternal. Our personal bond was literally the foundation of heavy metal music. Ozzy also revealed during their final conversation that he had been planning to include this information in his memoirs, but his declining health had made writing increasingly difficult. The phone call was his way of ensuring that Tony heard the truth directly from him rather than discovering it in a book or from someone else after his death. He said he wanted to make sure I heard it in his voice with all the emotion and love he felt about our friendship. Tony said he wanted me to understand that using my experiences in his songs wasn't theft. It was his way of honoring what our friendship meant to him, his way of making sure that the most important parts of our shared history would never be forgotten. But perhaps the most shocking part of Ozzy's confession was his revelation about why he was finally telling Tony the truth after keeping it secret for so many decades. He explained that facing his own mortality had made him realize that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, were barriers to authentic connection. He wanted to die knowing that Tony understood the true depth of their creative partnership and the role their friendship had played in creating music that had influenced generations. He said that keeping this secret had been a form of loneliness. Tony revealed, every time we performed those songs, every time people praised his lyrics, he felt like he was experiencing success that should have been shared. He wanted me to know that our friendship had been the most important creative force in his life, more important than any solo career or individual achievement. The conversation also revealed that Ozzy had been carrying another burden, the fear that Tony might feel betrayed or used when he learned the truth. He had convinced himself over the years that his friend would be angry about having his personal stories transformed into public art without his knowledge or consent. He kept apologizing and asking if I was angry with him. Tony said he was terrified that I would feel like he had violated my trust or exploited our friendship for his own gain. He couldn't understand that I was honored, not angry. The fact that my experiences had become part of something that helped so many people, that was a gift, not a betrayal. As their conversation neared its end, Ozzy made a request that initially surprised Tony, but ultimately made perfect sense. He asked Tony to share this story publicly after his death to help people understand that the darkness and power of Black Sabbath's music had come from real friendship, real experiences, and real love between two people who had supported each other through decades of challenges. He said he wanted people to know that heavy metal wasn't just noise and rebellion. Tony explained he wanted them to understand that our music came from genuine human connection, from friends who trusted each other enough to share their deepest fears and pain. He thought that might help people understand why our music has endured for so long and why it continues to speak to new generations. Ozzy also expressed his hope that sharing the true story behind their songs might inspire other artists to be more open about their creative processes and the personal relationships that fuel their art. He believed that music was most powerful when it came from authentic human experiences and connections. He said he wanted young musicians to understand that the best art comes from real relationships and genuine emotions. Tony revealed he hoped that knowing the truth about our songs might encourage other artists to be more honest about where their inspiration comes from and to value the friendships that make their creativity possible. The conversation concluded with mutual expressions of love and gratitude that had been building for over 5 decades but had never been fully expressed. Both men acknowledged that their friendship had been the foundation not just of their music but of their entire adult lives. The last thing he said to me was, "Thank you for trusting me with your stories, even when you didn't know I was using them," Tony recalled, his voice breaking with emotion. Then he said, "Our friendship was the best song we ever wrote together, even though nobody else could hear it." That was pure Ozzy, finding the perfect metaphor for something that was impossible to put into words. 6 hours later, Tony received the call that Ozzy had died. The grief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with profound gratitude for having received such a complete and honest farewell from his oldest friend and creative partner. "I'm devastated that he's gone, but I'm grateful beyond words that he trusted me with the truth before he died." Tony said, "Understanding the real story behind our music doesn't change the songs, but it changes what they mean to me. Every time I play those riffs now, I'm not just remembering the music. I'm remembering our friendship and the trust that made the music possible." Tony's decision to share Ozzy's final confession publicly has already begun to change how fans and music historians understand Black Sabbath's legacy. The revelation that their most powerful songs were rooted in personal friendship and shared experiences adds a new dimension to music that was already considered groundbreaking and influential. Knowing the true story behind these songs makes them even more powerful, observed music journalist Robert Palmer. It reveals that Black Sabbath's music wasn't just about darkness and rebellion. It was about human connection and the way friends can help each other transform pain into something beautiful and meaningful. The story has also provided unexpected comfort to Tony as he processes his grief over losing his oldest friend. Instead of feeling that Ozzy had somehow deceived him for decades, he now understands that their entire relationship had been a form of ongoing creative collaboration that transcended traditional definitions of songwriting and partnership. "I don't feel betrayed or used," Tony emphasized. "I feel honored that my experiences could become part of something that has brought comfort and strength to so many people. Ozzy took the worst moments of my life and transformed them into music that has helped millions of people feel less alone. What greater gift could a friend give?" Tony Iommi was indeed the last person to hear Ozzy Osbourne's most important confession, a revelation that transformed decades of guilt into gratitude, secrecy into celebration, and individual pain into shared legacy. Their final conversation revealed that the foundation of heavy metal music was not anger or rebellion, but love, trust, and the profound connection between two friends who had learned to transform their struggles into art that would outlive them both. This final revelation between Ozzy and Tony reminds us that the most powerful art often comes from the deepest friendships and that trust between friends can create beauty that touches the world. Their story shows us that even our most personal struggles can become sources of strength for others when shared with love and understanding. If this story has moved you, please share it and remember the power of opening our hearts to those we trust.